Okay, so we're talking about the 5 principles that make a man. The first one, an allegiance to God. Not just any God, but God the Father, the true and living God. To be a man, to be a man's man, a man's man has to be a man dedicated to God, a man who puts God first, a man who has priorities, his priorities set in God. Now open your Bibles to 1 Samuel chapter 13, verse 14. And in it says, "But now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought him a man after his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be captain over his people, because you have not kept that which the Lord commanded you." God looks for men after his own heart. God looks for men who desire to be like God. And I'm not talking about in the sense of to be a God, but to be like God, to follow behind God, to do what is right in the eyes of God. And David is that sort of man. David was that type of man. And you figure, well, why David? Well, David has flaws, just like you and me and everyone else. See, there's a myth, so to speak, that people think that when they read about people in the Bible that they were superhuman or they had extraordinary skills. They were simple people who followed in the footsteps, followed in the paths of God. And they had flaws, they had weaknesses, they did wrong. David was no exception. David, you talk about the 10 Commandments, he broke just about all of them. But he was still a man after God's heart. We all know the story of David, him versus Goliath, David and Bathsheba. David going after Bathsheba, he went after a woman who was married and then plotted to have her husband killed, which would make him a murderer. He was an adulterer. And he had many other indiscretions. But he was still a man of God. Now, don't get the impression that you purposely go out and do something, some heinous act or some sort of crime or some sort of, be an adulterer. That's not the point. The thing is, it shows that being human, being a man, you can have flaws. And once you realize those flaws, once you atone for those flaws, once you seek forgiveness and say and forgive, so to speak, then the door is open for you to be a true man of God. So seek ye first the kingdom of God is the things that he asked. Seek first God. Be that type of man who seeks God first. Number 2, be a man of love. And what I want to do is show you this video about love and God. Check it out.
For thousands of years, every morning and evening, Jewish people have prayed these well-known words as a way of expressing their devotion to God. They're called the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And as for you, you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your strength. We're going to look at the third key word in this prayer, how Israel is called to love their God. But what does that mean? Love is a very common word in most languages, as it is in ancient Hebrew. It's pronounced ahava. It most basically refers to the kind of affection or care that one person shows another. It sometimes describes physical affection, like the king of Persia's love for Queen Esther. But there are other Hebrew words that more specifically refer to physical desire or sex. Ahava is more broad. So Abraham had ahava for his son Isaac, that's parental love. Jonathan showed ahava for his friend David, that would be brotherly love. In fact, a whole group of people can have ahava for their leader, like when the Israelites showed love for their King David. Ahava can even describe loyalty between political allies, like Hiram, the king of Tyre, loved David. They had good relations, and so Hiram wanted to help David's son Solomon build the temple. These are all different kinds of affection described with the one word, ahava. Now, all of this is helpful for understanding God's ahava in the Old Testament. So in Deuteronomy, Moses told the Israelites, God showed affection for you. He chose you because of his ahava for you. So God doesn't love because the Israelites earned it or deserve it. It simply originates from God's own character. He loves because he loves. This is why Jeremiah can say that God's love is everlasting. It has no end because it has no beginning. God's love just is an eternal fact of the universe. And God's love is not a duty, it's a genuine feeling, an affection that God experiences. This is why the prophet Hosea compares God's love for his people to a husband's ahava for his wife, or to a parent showing ahava for their child. It's one of the strongest things that God feels. But that doesn't mean that God's love is just a feeling. God's love is also in action. It's something God chooses to do. Like when Moses says, because of God's ahava for your ancestors, he brought you out of Egypt with great power. God's love isn't just a sentiment, it is something God does. And so, in the Shema, Israel is called to respond to God's ahava by showing ahava in return. And just like God's love, human love is to show itself through actions. Like in Deuteronomy 10. What does the Lord your God ask of you except to fear the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, to love him and serve him, and to keep his commands? All of these actions are centered around love. If I'm not doing them, I don't actually love God, I just say I do. Which leads to one last thing. In the Old Testament, I show my love for God by how I treat the people around me. In Deuteronomy, we read that God defends the cause of the fatherless and the widow, and he shows ahava for the immigrants among you, giving them food and clothing, and so you also show ahava for the immigrant. So the people are to imitate God's ahava by showing ahava for others. This is the idea underneath the famous line, you shall ahava your neighbor as yourself. And so at the end of the day, all of this is rooted in God's own eternal ahava. Like we read in the New Testament letter of 1 John, we love because God first loved us. And that's the Hebrew word ahava.
Now the word also says for husbands to love your wives as Christ loved the church. Now, yes, we're talking about men of honor, but I specifically want to talk about those men of honor who are married, because you carry a big responsibility. You are the prototype of what men should be when you follow correctly in God's footsteps. A man, when he puts God first, And then he puts his wife second, and then his children. Because when you follow in that order, you are following the path that God has ordained for you. So we are to love our wives like Christ loved the church. We are to make sacrifices for our wives. But showing that love, showing that passion. And marriage is an ongoing thing. When you come into that covenant, it's a serious thing. God doesn't play around with that. And today, too many people, too many men don't take it serious enough. Not enough take it serious. And we need to start taking it seriously. We definitely need to start taking it serious. If there's a problem, if there's an issue, hang in there and work it out. Life is about making changes. Life is about working through the problems to succeed, working through the problems to get better. It's not about having a wife and discarding her. It's about showing that love, that you made a commitment to that person, a lifelong commitment, till death do you part. So don't jump ship. Don't fall out of love and figure, well, I can find someone else. You made a commitment to God. God looks for you to keep that commitment. That's a true man of honor. Things happen all the time. There are disagreements all the time. Thing is, when there's a disagreement, you don't jump ship. You hang in there. You follow it through. So those men out here who are not married, and you contemplate on getting married, or look forward to getting married in the near future, make sure it is someone you truly love. Make sure that you are prepared for this commitment. Make sure. Because you have pledged to God. And God holds you to it. Men of honor. Alright, number 3. Truth. Be a man of truth. Be a man whose word is bond. Be a man who can be trusted. Because when you are trusted, your name takes shape. Your last name is like good credit. You can go a long way because you have that trust with people. In John chapter 8 verse 32, Jesus said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." There is freedom in truth. When you speak truth, when you are about truth, you don't have to constantly look behind your back. You don't have to constantly try to think about some egregious act that you came up with and lied about, and then trying to rehash it because it was made up. When it's truth, you don't have to make things up. You know, recently I've been watching Amos and Andy, the old television show. And I'm talking about the radio broadcast. I'm talking about the black cast back in the early 50s. Now, it was banned off television because the NAACP deemed it They deemed it offensive. But looking at the way people are today, talking about young black people, even older ones, all the cursing and booty shaking, that's offensive. That's offensive. That's just as offensive as some of the stuff that the NAACP deemed offensive about Amos and Andy. It was a funny show. You need to check it out on YouTube. It was a funny show because they did have some good qualities about it. Anyway, and one of the bad qualities about it was Kingfish. Now, Kingfish basically was the show. It was called Amos and Andy, but really Kingfish was the show. Kingfish was the type of man who was conniving, scheming, lying, didn't want to work, and it made me think about truth. His name, and now I just mentioned about when your name is good and it's like good credit. He was the opposite of that. When his name was said, people had a look of scorn, so to speak. Like I said, it was the total opposite of what a good name should be. His name was bad amongst the community. Everybody knew that he was scandalous, shiftless, and everything else of indiscretion that you can think of. Men of honor, you don't want to be a kingfish. You want a good name. Even from people who had never heard of you before, never seen you, but somehow they may have heard of your name. That goes a long way. Goes a long way. Number 4, dignity. What is dignity? Dignity is the state of or quality of being worthy of honor or respect. Like in Matthew 19:19, it says, honor father and mother. A man of honor honors his father and mother. You should treat others as you want to be treated. Be humble. Speak with dignity. Ephesians 4:29 says, let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouths. Stop all the cursing. Stop all the lying. Stop all the slanderous language and speech. Speak with dignity. Speak with humility. Up your vocabulary, man of honor. Up your vocabulary and stop all the cursing. Cursing is childish. Cursing is buffoonish. Now I can understand when one gets angry, okay, they say a curse word. But I'm talking about a constant usage of swearing. There's no need for that. None at all. Speak with dignity and walk with dignity, man of honor. And number 5, responsibility. Be responsible for everything you do. Be responsible at work. Be responsible in all your actions. Take responsibility. When you work, you do it to the utmost of God. You do it 100%. You put out the best you can. But in everything, you do it to the glory of God. Be responsible. Be responsible for the household bills. Be responsible. Don't push it off on the female, your wife, your girlfriend, whoever. Stop doing that. Be responsible. You have children, be responsible for them. Don't have to be made to be taken to court to take care of your own children. Be responsible. Grow. men of honor, grow. Grow. Those are the 5 principles that make a man: God, love, truth, dignity, and responsibility. Take hold of that. Take heed of that. Wrap yourself around that. And blessings to you, O man of God, O man of honor. Enough said.